Hi, my name is Terrence Nicholson. I've been a voice actor for 9+ years. I'm mostly known for my work with channels like Horror Shorts Party, IMR Scary Tales, Wansi Entertainment, MJV Animations, SSG Animations, and the occasional collab with channels like Animated Horror Flicks and Merrily Mary VO. I've also been featured in a couple indie horror games such as Sniper Killer and The Night is Long, and I voiced in many projects outside the horror genre, such as a very fun short film Journeyed Home, and I got to voice the main character Chad Famousin in the pilot The Famousins by PopTunes TV. Now that we got the introductions out of the way, here's what I want to talk about today. So I was doing a live stream last week with fans brainstorming video ideas, and someone had brought up the idea of doing a video on Rodney Alcala, otherwise known as the dating game killer. And I was immediately intrigued because I only knew a little bit about him, and all I really knew was that he was on the dating game, and the female contestant, even though she liked him at first and he won the game, she didn't want to go on the date with him after because he was too weird. And I only knew that from a Wendigoon video, so I was immediately interested and 100% down for this. So I went on Tubi and essentially found a documentary that told the story of Rodney Alcala, and here we are. This documentary is going to be the primary source, if not basically my only source, for the information I'm going to present here. And for the sake of brevity, trying to get this video out as quickly as I can, not really trying to rewrite the script right now, this is going to double as both a small biography of Rodney Alcala and his story, as well as a recap / review of that documentary. At the end of the video, I'm basically going to talk about how I feel after everything I've learned about Rodney Alcala, as well as what I think the takeaways of this story should be. Because I don't want it to just be, hey Terrence, tell us what this documentary said, but in your own words. So again, with that out of the way, here we go. The documentary starts with narration accompanied with a collage of photos that were apparently taken by Rodney Alcala himself. They then give some introductions to stuff later going on in the documentary, explaining how Rodney Alcala appeared to be a very charming, charismatic, and kind individual to pretty much most people around him, and how shocking it was to find out what was lying underneath. Interviews and narration start to go into a bit of Rodney Alcala's methods for finding victims. Rodney Alcala would drive up to women and young girls in his pickup truck and tell them how he was an amateur photographer and he thought they were very beautiful and he would like to take pictures of them because he thought they would make for great photos. He would ask them to come with him to the woods, probably not immediately like that, but essentially he would drive them to the woods, and that's where his horrific deeds would take place most of the time. And oftentimes these women and young girls would get in the truck with him. They then begin to describe how he would torture his victims. Essentially, he would asphyxiate them repeatedly. He would have them pass out and then wait for them to wake up and do it again. This was his method of control. It was quite literally how he got his rocks off. He liked to see the life leave their eyes. We then cut to his infamous scene on the dating game show where he essentially looked like a Patara fusion of Ted Bundy and Charles Manson. So visually speaking, there was some foreshadowing going on. And we learned something that I didn't know at the time, which was that at the time of his appearance on the dating game show, he was already on the registry and had already been convicted and served time in prison. We are going to go more into that later, for sure. And he continued to unalive people after the dating game show until he was finally convicted and put on death row. But we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves. The main thing that makes Rodney Alcala so creepy and chilling comes down to the fact that he has all these photos that he took of his victims, of women and girls in general, and we're not 100% sure how many of them are his victims. Since Rodney Alcala's conviction, he has been connected to over 100 cold cases, though. We then cut to Rodney Alcala's upbringing, where it's pretty much explained that he didn't really have any trauma or any setbacks that would affect him negatively or seem to affect him negatively in any way, and in any way play a part in who he would become later on. Essentially, this is one of those cases where it seems like, yeah, someone might have just been born evil. We fast forward past high school and college graduation, and Rodney Alcala joins the Army in 1961. He was only there for a couple years, though, because he had a mental breakdown. In 1963, Rodney Alcala went AWOL and hitchhiked from North Carolina to Los Angeles, California, presumably just to visit his mother. He then turned himself in to the military police and was given psychiatric treatment and an evaluation. Alcala's commanding officer gave a review at the time that the documentary explained seemed prophetic looking back. He essentially called Alcala a narcissist, said he's a very selfish person, he doesn't really do anything for anyone else but himself. Oh wow, the sociopath is a selfish person who doesn't care if other people are hurt. I wonder what could have given that clue. After being discharged due to his condition, in 1964 he went to UCLA to pursue his dream of being a photographer. He graduated in 1968. We then start to learn about the case of Tabby Shapiro. Tabby was an 8-year-old girl walking to school one day when a man drove up next to her. That man was Rodney Alcala. He most likely approached her under the guise of wanting to take photos, and then when she wasn't sure or was uncomfortable, he said, "Oh, it's cool, I know your parents." So if you ever wondered, hey, why do we have these code words our parents give us in case anyone says our parents are in trouble or they know our parents, he's one of the reasons why. Luckily for Tabby, a man in his car saw what was happening, just went, this don't seem right, and followed them. He followed them to Rodney Alcala's apartment and watched them go in, and once again said to himself, this don't seem right. This don't seem right. So he calls the police. Remember this, because I'm going to mention it again later. The cops show up to the apartment door, knock, and Rodney essentially goes, I'm in the shower real quick. I'm getting dressed. Sorry, can you give me a minute? But the officers had heard a very faint but audible and clearly very pained moan on the other side. So they kicked the door in. On the ground, covered in, I don't know if I can say what it is, we'll call it red stuff, was 8-year-old Tabby Shapiro. Rodney Alcala had booked it out the door, and the police officers had a choice. Do we chase after the bad guy, or do we try to save this little girl? And the police made the correct choice. Tabby Shapiro was rushed to the hospital and luckily survived this traumatic encounter. Inside Rodney Alcala's apartment, they found cameras, tripods, and photos. Photos of women and young girls, along with his UCLA student ID. Detective Hodel launched a huge search for Alcala and began interviewing people that knew him at UCLA. Of course, they go up to one of the professors, and the professor's like, "You got the wrong man. You got the wrong man, sir." Which, by the way, Detective Hodel just told him straight up, yeah, we're looking for this dude because, he violently ate a cupcake in YouTube terms. Let me just go on a quick rant here real quick. I'm going to turn the gain down for this just in case. Listen, I am big on giving people the benefit of the doubt. I am big on innocent until proven guilty. I'm big on skepticism, on not believing everything I'm instantly told. But if a police officer comes to me and tell me one of the homies is accused of anything involving the number 8, or really anything in that nature of a crime, anything under 18, really, I'm giving the cops whatever info I have. I'm not defending anything. I'm giving them whatever I have. I'll give them your mom's info. I'll give them anything I can. It's not necessarily that I 100% believe you did this shit, but I think it's very strange to me that you're getting accused of such a specific crime. So if I had to place a bet, I would most likely say you did it. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm sure as fuck not going to sit here and be like, oh, well, I think you got the wrong guy because I've known him for years and he's been a great fellow. Like, that means shit at all. What? The point is, this is the dumbest shit I ever heard, and it irritated me, so I just needed to make a point about it. If anyone ever around you gets accused of something like this, especially by law enforcement coming to you, which most likely means they have some evidence that might point him to the crime, shut the fuck up and just answer the goddamn question. Anyways, the professor, as well as many others, were shocked to find out the horrific things he did. Again, everyone found him to be kind, very funny, very charismatic. So nobody would have suspected he would do something like this. Remember this, because I'm going to bring it up again. Rodney Alcala had actually fled to New York using a new alias named John Berger, or John Berger. He actually used a fake ID to enroll as an undergraduate in New York University Film School. While Alcala was on the run in New York 1971, he had attacked, raped, and took the air out of repeatedly a woman named Cordelia Crilly, an airline stewardess. Unfortunately, decades passed before they ever realized he was the killer. He wasn't even a suspect at the time. He then became a counselor at a summer camp, essentially, an art summer camp. An all-girl, same age as these Ninja Turtles, summer camp. Jesus fucking Christ, this dude just found his hunting grounds real quickly. Fuck. Detective Hodel did not give up his search on Rodney Alcala, and it actually got him put on the FBI's most wanted list. This led to posters getting put up in post offices everywhere, but more specifically in the same town that Rodney Alcala worked in. A couple girls who went to the camp that Rodney Alcala worked at saw the posters and said, "Yo, that's our counselor. That's Mr. Berger. We need to go to the police right now." Shortly after, Rodney Alcala was arrested, and Detective Hodel had actually escorted him back to Los Angeles. Detective Hodel explained that even in this situation where there's so much evidence stacked against him, he was still carrying on this carefree, happy-go-lucky, chill attitude. Like, oh, this is all just one big misunderstanding. I didn't, do any violent crimes involving any women or young girls. What do you mean? Why did I go to New York? I just thought it was lovely this time of year. This has nothing to do with this. Why am I using a different alias? I felt like changing my name. I spiritually don't feel like Alcala anymore. I identify as a Berger. Unfortunately, Tabby Shapiro's family had moved to Mexico, so Rodney Alcala was given a sentence of 1 year to life. Basically, he has to serve 1 year minimum, and after that, he'll be given psych evaluations, and depending on how a psychiatrist feels, he could potentially be released. Unfortunately, he spent less than 3 years in prison because he passed a psych evaluation. Because why not? It's got to make the story more interesting, I guess. Incompetence in the medical field always adds some spice to the story. A point is made in the documentary again about how Rodney was so charismatic, so smart, and how he could easily have just given the shrink all the right answers. And while I understand that to some degree, I understand narcissists, sociopaths. I've dealt with my fair share of narcissists. I understand they can be very manipulative. I get that. But at the same time, one sec. What the fuck is the right answer? What is the right answers for this type of thing? Does someone say, yeah, I committed this awful act, say, I totally understand what I did was wrong now though, and I don't want to do it again, and a psychiatrist or anybody with a functioning brain just go, oh yeah, you only served like 2 years? Yeah, you can leave. Like what? You get that? Like most people don't even have like a thought of doing this in their head, right? So just to do this, to be capable of doing something like this, you wouldn't think like he needs to be gone for a little while longer just so we can be extra sure? No, he just committed an atrocious act that traumatized a young girl probably for the rest of her life. But he's sorry, he knows what he did was wrong. The correct answer is none, because in New York, 1977, a young woman named Ellen Hover was found dead in the woods. Guess who killed her? Oh yeah, and I did say New York, by the way. He actually managed to convince his parole officer that he wasn't a flight risk and went back to New York. Which, that's just crazy to me that somehow this man managed to convince you. This isn't as bad as the psychiatrist, though. Rodney Alcala at this time had also attacked a pregnant 28-year-old woman named Christine Thornton. Once again, the correct answer is none. She had apparently left her home in Texas to go on a trip cross-country, telling her parents that she was panning for gold. Which just kind of leads me to ask a question, and I'm not trying to victim blame anyone here, but someone correct me if I'm stupid in the comments. A pregnant woman wants to go cross-country and you just let her? I'm not the smartest guy. Cross country usually implies at least for a few days, right? A pregnant woman just driving on I guess a motorbike or something for across the country for a few days? That doesn't sound like a bad idea to anybody. That couldn't affect the baby, like stress the woman out in any negative way. There's no issues that could come up. A pregnant woman just by herself in general is not like an alarming thing. Where, especially in the time, there was no cell phones back then. Not like, we have now. You couldn't just call people so easily like you can now. So if she went missing, again, being pregnant, no. Especially again, I know I'm ignorant, I'm a guy, but like, I have 2 younger brothers, much younger. And if my mother had come to me one day while she was pregnant and said to me, Terrence, I'm going to go cross country, or anybody for that matter, I'm going to go cross country on a trip. I won't be back for a few days. She would have to stab me to get through the door. There's just no way I would just go, no, there's something's going on with her brain right now, and she's not thinking properly. She cannot be walking, driving alone by herself. So I don't understand this, to say the least. This pissed me off a bit. Anyway, she seemingly disappeared, and it wasn't discovered until much later that she was one of Alcala's victims. In that same year, Rodney had actually moved back to Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, Rodney had met a young 15-year-old runaway that may have been a night girl named Jill Barcombe. He may have lured her in with his ruse of photography, we're not quite sure, but he drove her up to the Hollywood Hills. While they were in the woods, Rodney had knocked her out and had used 3 different items to bind and choke her with. Some pantyhose, a belt, and her own stockings that she was wearing. Presumably, it was because he had suffocated her so hard and for so long that 2 of the items he had brought broke and he had to improvise, because that's how fucking evil this dude was. He had brutalized Jill Barcombe to the point that her brother said she was almost unrecognizable. The next day, November 10th, 1977, her body was found on Mulligan Drive. Apparently, the actor Marlon Brando was questioned at that time because he lived in that area, which had to make for a funny conversation later. The police at that time were trying to connect the cases of 11 women who happened to be killed and their bodies dumped off in Hollywood Hills. The police believed that Jill's case was connected to the Hillside Strangler, who also happened to be rampant around this time. Jill's body was posed when they found her, and he seemed to do this with all his victims. This was a critical clue for police later down the line. In the fall of 1977, Rodney Alcala had actually got a job as a typesetter at the Los Angeles Times. Dark fact for you, that same printing press would report on the murders that he committed while he was working there and most likely after, which just had to be a really awkward day at the office. Hey Bill, you hear that story about Alcala? Yeah, it turns out he was murdering women up in the woods. Yeah, you think you know a guy. I thought he was really nice. Hey, Sydney, didn't you say you thought he was cute and that you wanted to ask him out? Rodney Alcala's next victim was a 27-year-old woman by the name of Georgia Wickstead. She was raped and brutalized in her home in December 1977. Unfortunately, as I said previously, Rodney was not the only serial killer very active at this time, so it was very easy for a lot of his murders to get pinned onto the Hillside Strangler because their MO seems so similar. Now, because the Hillside Strangler was so rampant around this time, they did actually interview Alcala because he was on the registry, and they were basically interviewing everyone on the registry. Everyone in the area, that is. So Rodney Alcala was actually interviewed for this, but of course he wormed his way out of it. After evading that, his next victim was a 32-year-old woman by the name of Charlotte Lamb. Her body was found posed in the laundry room of an apartment complex in 1978. This was actually the same year that Alcala ended up on the dating game show. Now I want to remind you again that at this time, Rodney Alcala had already been convicted and had served time for the brutal attack, in the most delicate way I can put it, of Tabby Shapiro, and was on the registry. And he still got on here. Now you might be asking yourself, Terrence, how could this be? How could they have let this violent criminal on this show and put the women and really everyone around him in danger? Well, in case some of you don't already know, the dating game, as well as most reality game TV shows back then, didn't do background checks at all. I'm sorry, again, what the fuck, man? Like, just what? Really? Like, this is, I understand, like, oh, well, we may not assume immediately they're a serial killer, but, like, what if he steals the equipment on the set at the very least, bro? You don't know. He's not even a criminal, like a thief record or anything. Maybe he's a kleptomaniac. We don't know. Oh, well, he's good looking and most people find him charming, so yeah, he can come on the show. We don't want to protect the women we have on here at all. I guess, to be fair, this was the 70s. This is just, I hate it, but yeah, it just truly was a different time is the only explanation that can be given. And even then, it seems like such a fucking insane oversight for something like this. But then again, you know, crazier oversights have happened at this point at later times and dates, so I guess it's not that crazy. I also think domestic abuse might have been a little more normalized at this time, unfortunately. Moving on. Okay, let me set the scene for you. A young woman named Cheryl Bradshaw is on the dating game show. Behind a wall next to her, or a door or whatever, are 3 contestants that she gets to pick from. Throughout the night, she asks the guests questions and they respond with these corny jokes and stuff, and everyone's having a good time. As the show goes on, it seems like contestant number 1 is really liked by Cheryl and really liked by the audience and even the guys next to him, honestly. Eventually, she's given a choice as to which contestant she wants, and she says, I want number 1. That number 1, of course, was Rodney Alcala, or Alcala, because the announcer didn't bother to fucking ask him how to say it. Now remember, all the way up to this point, he has been liked by her. She was liked by the audience. Guys next to him seemed like they were pretty chill with him. He's generally liked by everyone there. In general, he is considered a very liked person. He's considered very kind, very sweet, very charismatic, very funny. Most people like him, but as soon as those cameras came off, Cheryl was just getting some real fucked vibes. More specifically, she was creeped out by how he was looking at her and how he kind of hovered over her, invading her personal space. Felt like she didn't have much room to breathe. She was so creeped out by him after the show that she refused to take the free date and trip that was offered by the dating game show. Remember this. Remember this. Again, remember this. Moving on. After this, in February 1979, Rodney Alcala had picked up a 15-year-old hitchhiker named Monique Hoyt. Somehow he got her to stay the night and then drove her up to the woods the next day to take pictures. He asked her to pose for photos, and when she wasn't looking, he knocked her out and did what Rodney Alcala does. However, in a shocking twist, Rodney didn't actually kill her, at least not yet. Monique Hoyt found herself waking up to Rodney Alcala laying on the floor crying, and incredibly quick-witted, basically pretended like nothing ever happened. She literally said, "I had a really good time with you yesterday. I'd like to hang out more." And when he thought that he had just Stockholmed this girl in like a night, he said okay, untied her, they got in his pickup truck and drove off, and when he had to stop at a restroom, presumably at a gas station or something, she said, "Fuck this shit, I'm out," and booked it. She then reported this to the police as soon as possible. Monique was shown a list of suspects that matched her description. She immediately pointed to Alcala, said that's him, and then went to the hospital to treat her wounds. Alcala was arrested, but of course, there just had to be something getting in the way. His mother posted his bond, and very shortly after, he was back out on the streets. Man, I get the whole motherly love and everything, but Jesus Christ, can it go overboard? So free to prowl the streets once again, did Rodney Alcala lay low and avoid doing anything to avoid any detection or potential adding to his charges? No, he got right back to business, because when a selfish, narcissistic person thinks they can get away with something, and they pretty much have for a very long time, they're going to continue to do that thing. The result of this impassioned act of motherly love was Rodney Alcala meeting a young woman named Jill Parento at a saloon. He had asked her to dance, she declined, and then later down the line, we don't know for how long, Rodney had stalked her. He then waited for her to leave the house one day, snuck into her house, waited in her closet, and then when she got home, did what Rodney Alcala does. She was found dead in her bed the next day, naked, posed, just like all the others. Again, he wasn't even considered a suspect, so he went on to find more victims. Once again, this beautiful act of motherly love resulted in another mother losing her 12-year-old daughter. On the 20th of June, 1979, Robin Samso was hanging out with her friend, Bridget Wilbert, on the beach. Rodney Alcala had approached them and said that he was trying to take photos for some competition for a prize. He told them that with them as his models, he knows he could win, or something to that effect. Luckily, Bridget's neighbor saw what was going on, thought to herself, that don't look right, and intervened, and politely escorted the young girls away from him. Later on, Robin had borrowed her friend's bike and had taken it to her ballet class. After that, no one had seen Robin alive again. I'm fixing my necklace, sorry. After she had returned for a bit, her mother called the police, in which they said that they couldn't make a report for 24 hours. After 24 hours passed, they considered it a kidnapping. A few days after that, police found her body dumped out in the hills above Altadena. Her body had been scavenged by animals, and some of her bones were not found for weeks after that. There was little to nothing there left. It took 3 days for police to confirm that it was her, and the process of explaining this to the mother had to be a heartbreaking experience, because just watching the mother retell it was a gut-wrenching experience. The police came to her house and had told her that they had found Robin. As she got her stuff and got ready to go, the police told her that she couldn't go and that she didn't want to see her like this. They told her that it took 3 days for them to identify that it was her. To which the mother said, 3 days? How many young blonde girls go missing in California that it took you 3 days to identify her? To which the police officer said, "Ma'am, there was no hair." And she at that point understood, and her world was shattered. Robin's friend Bridget gave police a description for the sketch artist. The sketch was very widely distributed, so much so that Rodney Alcala's parole officer saw the sketch and just immediately went, yeah, I know that dude. He immediately notified law enforcement, and on July 24th, 1979, holy shit, I got that right, he was put in a room with his sister where he was being recorded unknowingly, and he told his sister that there was some stuff in a storage unit in Seattle that he desperately wanted destroyed, basically. And this is where police found 1,700 photos taken by Alcala. Police had also found jewelry, or trophies, if you will. Rodney Alcala, of course, pleaded not guilty, which I mean, whatever, dude, it's your funeral. It's not like they got tons of evidence against you. And he was convicted in 1980. He had a retrial and his verdict was overturned twice, but he never left his prison cell. Rodney Alcala's luck had officially run out. In 2010, 30 years later, thanks to the advancement in DNA technology, Rodney had now been connected to tons of cold cases. Alcala had been connected to 4 murders in Los Angeles County. They were the 4 victims mentioned previously: Jill Barcombe, Charlotte Lamb, Georgia Wickstead, and Jill Parento. So while he was still serving time for his charge with Robin Samsoe, he was then put on trial for these cases as well 30 years later. He actually chose to represent himself for this case, which at the time when I first heard that, I thought that's a dumb thing to do and also very weird, especially what I had heard that he had done in the courtroom. I thought it was just him having a mental breakdown of sorts right there in the courtroom or something and really thinking that this crazy plan was going to work. However, based on what the documentary says and what some of his victims who he was allowed to then interview said, this very likely was some way to relive the past for him. That's sort of my theory, because he got to interview his victims. He got to ask them questions and basically try to make them seem to be liars. And according to the mother of Robin Samsoe, if I remember correctly, when he was about to ask a question, when he was about to pick who he was going to ask, or, a witness to put to the stand, he'd get this big grin on his face and he'd start smiling at you. So this was like his way, my theory, his way of reliving his past and taking joy out of the pleasure of hurting others, taking joy out of the fact that he essentially has this power and control in this moment. He can't, hurt these people again, but he can put them through a form of torture and pain in this courtroom. So that's why I think he chose to do that. I think he knew at the end of the day that he was done for. And so instead of trying to fight these cases in any way, he decided, well, I'm going to just enjoy myself hurting these people. 2 days later, he was found guilty on all counts. Now, while yes, the monster was put away with all the photos they found during the investigation wasn't. Out of the 1,700 photos, it is estimated that at least 130 of them are his victims, which makes me beg the question, where the fuck do serial killers find the time? Was this really just a 70s thing and things were so much cheaper, you could just make this your hobby of doing evil shit all the time? While he was locked up, he was proven to be responsible for the murder of Cordelia Crilly as well as Ellen Hover. According to the documentary, law enforcement is still trying to see if there's a connection between those photos and tons of other cold cases. So much so that they actually released the photos to the public on a website so that loved ones of the victims could potentially find them. And many did. Over 21 women were actually accounted for in those photos, and other women and children were confirmed to be missing by family members for many years. This was actually how Christine Thornton was confirmed to be one of Alcala's victims. Christine Thornton and her unborn child's unidentified remains were found by a rancher in Wyoming in 1982. This case was completely cold until these photos were released. Rodney Alcala was now charged for this crime in 2016. Which just kind of makes me beg the question, honestly. Like, I know he was a monster, but like, why even? What does this do? He's not getting out. It's just, basically, we're just bringing him in to remind him, like, yeah, you know how you're not, like, ever getting out of here? Well, you're still not. Burnt. Get out. Another case that got solved was the case of Pamela Jean Lamson. Pamela had gone missing in 1977 after meeting a guy at Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco. Her body had been found strangled the next day. Rodney had also become a person of interest in the case of Joyce Gaunt and Antoinette Whitaker, 2 women who were murdered in Seattle, the place where he kept his photos. The documentary concludes basically saying that while Rodney has been caught, we may never truly know how high his victim count is and how many of the women in those photos are still alive. Unfortunately, we will truly never know how many victims he's had because a year after this documentary made, Rodney Alcala died of natural causes while waiting death row. So that was the story of Rodney Alcala. I have to say that was pretty interesting. He was not what I expected. I really thought he was going to be this Dahmer-type serial killer that was so weird and out of the ordinary that looking back, people really should have known something was up. But he was more of a Ted Bundy type. Very charming, very kind to most people, seemed very charismatic. And he was liked by pretty much mostly everybody, except for a few people who just looked at him, saw what happened, and thought, something ain't right here. Which brings me to what I think our takeaways should be. There's about 3 takeaways in total. 2 are a little minor, but there's something that I couldn't help but think about while I was watching. They're kind of a reach. They're not really what the main takeaway should be, but I still think they're an important lesson here. And then we're going to have the main takeaway that's going to be in the title of this video. The first minor takeaway is don't romanticize the past. I know everyone, we always do this. We always romanticize our childhood. We romanticize years before us. We romanticize this, conservatives really romanticize this golden age period near the 50s and things like that, and even other people romanticize the 70s and 80s and say, things were simpler, things weren't as bad as they are now. They were worse in some ways. We just didn't know how bad it truly was. We didn't know these things were going on. So while things seemed more peaceful because there weren't all these restrictions, there were these monsters lurking in the dark who were taking advantage of that freedom and using it to prey on innocent people. So don't romanticize the past. The past is the reason that we have things we do today. The past is the reason we have the problems we do today. The second takeaway, love your children, but for fuck's sake, use some thinking skills. Love your children, but for fuck's sake, think about other people's safety. I understand that most mothers would instantly try to help their kid if they were in prison. I get that. I truly do understand that. There's just an instinct in here that immediately makes you protective of this kid. I get it. But you can still care about them and you can still try to help them while making sure that other people are safe. You didn't need to post his bond is basically what I'm getting at. I know she's not watching this, his mother's not watching this, but his bond didn't need to get posted. Visit him in prison, write him letters, do all that stuff. But for the sake of the potential victims, because this was a very big case and it wasn't his only charge, for fuck's sake, you use your head a little bit. Yes, I know you love him. I know you don't want him to stay in prison. You might feel like he's in danger, but he was convicted. This is twice at this point for very violent offenses. Love him, support him the best you can, but make sure other people are safe because this impassioned act of love caused the deaths of multiple women. On the flip side, the final takeaway from this that I think is the most important thing, the thing I want to highlight here, again, Rodney Alcala was liked by almost everyone. He was considered charming, he was funny, he seemed smart, very kind. Everyone, almost everyone, liked him, except for a few people who saw him and the way he was acting in these certain instances and just thought to themselves, something don't feel right. Their gut told them something wasn't right. And so our final takeaway here is always trust your gut. There are 3 parts of this story here in which someone trusting their gut and just saying to themselves, something don't seem right here, I'm going to intervene. I'm going to do something about this. And listening to that and following their gut saved lives, literally every single time. The guy who saw Rodney Alcala pick up Tabby Shapiro, he saw something was up. He potentially saved her life. She could have bled out. Police would have never shown up if he hadn't saw that and acted on it. Bridget's neighbor being another one, just immediately seeing this man come to approach these 2 young girls and knowing, I don't care. I don't like this. That something's not right, and escorting them away. Unfortunately, Robin Samsoe did become a victim. However, I fully believe that had the neighbor not intervened, Bridget would have been one too. And in the case of Cheryl Bradshaw, the contestant on the dating game, her gut told her, hey, something's not right about this dude. I'm not comfortable going on this date. And it saved her life. If she had gone on that date, she very likely would have never come back. These are 3 cases where people listened to their gut and it saved lives, theirs and others. So our final takeaway here is always listen to your gut. You don't need to, it's not necessarily that your gut is telling you that this person is a serial killer or they're villainous or they have this level of evil intent, but your gut can kind of sense sometimes when something's off with somebody. And it may not be something to this extreme, but I guarantee you've had times where you had that feeling, you didn't listen, and it didn't go well. So again, the final takeaway here, always listen to your gut. It can save you and others. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope this is something that people really enjoy and maybe I can make more. This was actually a lot of fun. I would like to cover a bit longer topics, but again, for the sake of brevity, I really had to, get this out as quick as I could. I'd like to do more research. I'm still planning on doing a video on P. Diddy, but That is probably going to take a while because there's just new stuff coming out, and I'm getting to a point where I think it might just be a good idea to wait until near the end of the trial, or at least until things kind of die down, to then add stuff and then make that video. So the next video I'm planning to do for this channel would be the Menendez brothers. I'm going to talk about that, give a sort of a biography on them, and give my take on the story of the Menendez brothers. As well, I have plenty of other projects coming out voice acting wise, so if you want to check out some of my work, be sure to check out my portfolio. As I said before, be sure to play Sniper Killer. Check out my previous video if you haven't already. And again, like, comment, share, subscribe. I hope you really enjoy, and I hope we can make more of these in the future. Have a good day.